I'm on the edge of the Mount Evans Wilderness just outside Denver on this beautiful day. I've come here to meet Jim Bedwell. Jim is the supervisor of the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forests and the Pawnee National Grassland. So Jim, we know as wilderness stewards that we have a duty to preserve wilderness character, but wildernesses are designated for people, aren't they?
Oh, absolutely. The Wilderness Act starts out by proclaiming the National Wilderness Preservation System is for the permanent good of the whole people. One of the cornerstones of wilderness management is protect wilderness benefits.
What kind of benefits are we talking about?
People usually think first of recreational benefits in wilderness, but the Act specifically lists the categories of scenic, scientific, educational, conservation, and historical use in addition to recreation.
That's a pretty broad range. Does the Act get any more specific?
Well, in terms of recreation, it talks about opportunities for solitude or unconfined primitive recreation.
Talking about those recreational values, I noticed you use the word or.
Well, they don't both have to be present. A prevailing value is to provide those opportunities for solitude. But at the same time, wilderness is about freedom and unconfined recreation. And people are generally free to move where they want as long as they aren't causing damage to the ecosystem.
If both are present, though, both must be protected.
Some people like the challenge of being in a very primitive environment and testing their skills. And other people just want to know that those vestiges of primitive America are there. Some of the obvious tangible benefits are clean water that flows from unmanipulated natural area, clean air, scenic backdrops for the cities, and again, that existence value of wilderness as an idea.
If I understand this, there are recreational benefits that can be received in the wilderness, like solitude and primitive recreation. And then there are societal values and benefits that are received outside the wilderness, everything from the clean water that flows out of Mount Evans and ends up in Denver's drinking water, to increased scientific knowledge and even aesthetic appreciation of works of art.
Oh, yes.
And then there are biological, biophysical values.
Yeah, I think the creators of the Wilderness Act back in 1964 were very visionary. They saw then that we needed an antidote to the increasing civilization, development, and mechanization of our society, and they came up with wilderness as an answer to that.
So there must be conflicts between preserving the social values and the biophysical values and the values of the wildness itself, particularly in a wilderness like Mount Evans that's right next to millions of people.
Oh, absolutely. For instance, here in Mount Evans, we have a paved state highway that goes to the top of a 14,000-foot peak, which is quite an attractor and brings people to the edge of the wilderness. So that is tricky.
So how do you provide for human benefits while preserving wilderness values? How do you deal with conflicts between unconfined recreation and preserving solitude or biophysical values? How do you minimize impacts while maximizing freedom?
We choose to use education and awareness raising to reach people about what the values are and what impacts recreation may have on them. And that's consistent with the unconfined, primitive nature of recreation that we try to provide in wilderness. We can't have big signs everywhere that say, do this, don't do that. So we rely on signs at the trailhead, information in our visitor stations and ranger stations, brochures, and working with wilderness guidebook authors to let people know what is important in wilderness, the ecological values and the impacts they may have as recreationists and what they can do about it.
Do you deal with adjacent agencies like Rocky Mountain National Park?
Definitely we do. Rocky Mountain National Park is one of the icons of the national park system and attracts a lot of people into the area. The Arapahoe and Roosevelt surround Rocky Mountain National Park. So we do coordinate what's appropriate recreation, how to manage the settings and wilderness areas between the two. Another example right here in the Mount Evans area is the Denver Mountain Park system. 100 years ago, they had the foresight to designate areas up in the mountains within the national forest where citizens from the city of Denver could come and experience nature. And those tend to be more developed than certainly our wilderness areas, but they're very beautiful, scenic, and provide other opportunities for people to experience nature without impacting the wilderness.
But we're still left with the question of how you balance seemingly competing values.
Sometimes hard choices have to be made. And when I'm faced with those hard choices, I go back to the Wilderness Act itself and look not just at the letter of the law, but at the spirit and intent as well. And that intent is that the enduring resource of wilderness is paramount. And what that means to me is that the ecological, the biophysical aspects of wilderness must be maintained. It's a basic tenet of conservation in general, and certainly of wilderness management, that you take care of the basic resources, the land, the soil, the water, the vegetation first, and from that other benefits will flow. But we can't forget that the aesthetic or human values of wilderness are important as well. When you think about it, the Wilderness Act itself was a result of human values, saying these resources need to be protected. So if you don't have people experiencing and enjoying and realizing what's there in wilderness, we could over time lose that resource as well.
So this brings us right back to the central question, the bottom line. What do you do when you have two competing good values? How do you decide that?
Well, you really have to look at the temporal scale. What impacts are going to have the most effect? And that brings you once again back to the ecological factors. If use is having an adverse impact on the landscape, on the biophysical factors, then you have to find a way to limit it, to redirect it, or to minimize those impacts, because that is the enduring resource of wilderness that we are obliged to protect.
Well, thanks a lot, Jim. I really appreciate it. You've helped us to understand our responsibilities in protecting wilderness benefits while preserving its values. Protect wilderness benefits.